Okay, it's 8 o'clock. We're going to get started. I'd like to introduce Dr. Compton. Welcome to our grandparents. Dr. Compton is engaged in, was involved in organizing and facilitating community or diversity activities with the community within the School of Medicine. And we're really excited to hear from him. He has a wealth of knowledge, and we could learn a lot from him about how to make our departments or our neuroscience as a whole more diverse and interacting with the community. So welcome. Thank you.
All right. Let me thank you for that.
Let's switch the screen share, right?
Oh, feel free. I'm not familiar with this with y'all.
So it'll show your presentation. Okay. Usually like really good.
I'll just stay on the other one.
Yeah.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Let me step over here so I can see you all over to my left. It is a pleasure to be here with you all this morning, and I want to thank all those responsible for inviting me to be here. Right. It's not rare. It's not often that I get a chance to really get out into many of the departments to do grand rounds. I usually do a couple of years. So as I was sharing with a few folks earlier, I hadn't been over here in this particular room since 2016. I got here in 2015 and had a few meetings when I was making my rounds, working with department chairs. And so I met with Dr. Nemat, and I believe that was when he first came in as well. So it's good to be back. And thank you all for wrapping your arms around and embracing this topic, right? I like to be very transparent that these days when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, there's a lot that's happening around it, right? You look at the news cycle. There was stuff in the Courier Journal yesterday about DEI. So we like to be very transparent about it, but at the same time, be unapologetic about it. I'm fortunate that I get the opportunity to serve in a variety of roles here at the School of Medicine. I serve as the Chief Diversity Officer. I serve as the Associate Dean for Community Engagement. I serve also as an assistant professor. I primarily work with our first through fourth year medical students, but more so first and second years. The most. And then I'm the chair of the Commission on Diversity and Racial Equity, which is a university-wide commission that advises the president on issues around DEI. All right. And so I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge two of my colleagues who's here that I share in doing this work with, Dr. Faye Jones and Mr. Ryan Simpson. There's a whole team of us that do this work here in the School of Medicine. So, I would encourage you all to, I know you all had Dr. John Chenault do a talk as well. We have quite a few folks that help the School of Medicine advance this work. So it's not just an eye kind of thing. One of the things that I want to do in terms of when people see me, right, or they hear about me, these are the things that they identify me with, right? And I always, when I'm doing a presentation, I always like to say, anytime I step into space, there's a whole lot of things that people don't know that I carry into a room with me, right? I'm Louisville native, I'm from West Louisville. I actually grew up in a situation where I always say, if I had to submit the FAFSA today, I'd be still Pell eligible, right? I went to an undergrad institution called Berea College, and Berea is a great institution, but only caters to students that fall below a certain income guideline, right? I'm a former student athlete, played college basketball, coached college basketball. I'm a husband, I'm a father. So there's so many different identities I carry with me, as you all do too. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through this presentation, this talk today. One of the things that we're going to talk about is cultural awareness and cultural responsiveness, right? The Office of Institutional Equity utilizes a land acknowledgement, and I think it's something that most people here at the University of Louisville don't even know exists. So in the spirit of supporting and fostering learning through the generation of sharing of knowledge, we acknowledge that the land we are meeting on today is the original homelands of the Shawnee, Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Osage tribal nations. We acknowledge that the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory And we honor and respect the many diverse indigenous people still connected to this land on which we gather. I graduated from Shawnee High School, right? I grew up in the Shawnee community, of course, have family in the Cherokee community, the Chickasaw community as well. So it's one of those things we have to acknowledge, and it goes into being culturally aware and culturally responsible about where you are, right? Today, we're going to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. We're going to engage in some dialogue around creating and sustaining an inclusive workforce and learning environment, and then talk about some resources that is always available, but I don't think many people utilize. Session norms, we ask that you listen respectfully and actively with an open mind to understand another point of view, commit to learning and not debating. The stories stay, lessons go. Share the space, allow others to speak, and then avoid assumptions about your colleagues. And so in other words, check your biases, because sometimes you may not outwardly say anything, but you could be thinking it, right? Check your biases here, even if you're not openly saying anything. This is our university diversity vision statement. I know Dr. Jones and Mr. Simpson know about this very well, but again, one of those things that gets buried in our website and people don't see too often. One of the things that I want to highlight in this is we say that we strive to foster and sustain an environment of inclusiveness that empowers us all to achieve our highest potential without fear of prejudice or bias, right? And there's some other really useful things in this statement. And this is what we say we're holding our faculty, staff, students, trainees to, right? And if that's the case, then we have to be doers of that. We can't, it's one thing to have a lofty, mission and vision statement, but if you never follow through on that, it's no good, it's null and void. So we have to make sure that we're being doers of our words as an institution, as well as departments. So we talk about what diversity is, right? And again, I like to be transparent. Right now, everything is about diversity, focusing on race and sex. You hear the divisive topics and you hear discriminatory topics and things of that nature, right? But diversity is much more than that, right? Diversity is that puzzle piece to make all of us who we are, all of those identities that we carry and maintain. Yeah, race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, and so on and so forth. All of these things make us who we are. And we carry those things into any space, whether that's a learning space, whether that's a workspace, whether that's just a space in the community that you're going to enjoy leisurely. We carry these things with us all the time, and it makes us who we are. But the collective is of all these things, of these pieces of each of us as individuals, is what we talk about diversity. And when we say diversity, it's not just race, it's not just gender, it's all of these things that we all carry into space. But we can only take advantage of it if we use our diversity. And then, there's a lot of data out there to support that diverse organizations are the most productive, right? There's a lot of data out there that supports that. So when you think about diversity, I want you to think about all these things, all these identifiers that we kind of think about, like we identify socially, that make us who we are. All right, so I want to do a little activity, and hopefully we can get some that's joining us virtually to participate as well. But when you think about identities that you carry, right? Think about an identity that you are. So I am, right? But then think about something that might be negative, right? Some kind of stereotype about that identity that you feel like, hey, I am this identity, but this is not, I'm not what people might think that is, right? So take a second and think through that. Usually we give people paper and have you do this exercise, and I'll ask a few people to share out. Any brave souls they care to share?
I'm a dad.
But
I'm not a disciplinarian.
he's a dad, but he's not a disciplinarian. I like that. All right, good one. Somebody else. And others online, feel free to, I think we can see the raise hand function, or just chime in. Any other brave souls?
I'm a mom. That needs to be less hardworking.
But you are not hardworking.
Right.
So you want to think about an identity you carry and something that most people think that assigns a negative kind of connotation stereotype to that, right? And you want to disprove that and dispel that. Oftentimes, I have conversations about being a former student athlete, and at one point in time, someone made an inference, that because I was a student athlete, that I wasn't smart, right? That I was only in college because I was a student athlete, and I had to say, no, I'm a student athlete and I'm smart. Right. So oftentimes students and faculty, staff, or trainees have to find themselves doing that in the learning environment, right? Or get frustrated so they don't correct people when they encounter those kind of things. Sometimes we call those microaggressions, and implicit bias, and we'll get to that in just a second. But this is an exercise that I would encourage you all to do and make people get involved, right? It's very easy to sit and not participate. But when you get involved, it really makes you think. It gets your mind running about the things that people might think about you that's not true. All right. So we're going to proceed to talk about what equity is. Equity is a focus on equitable opportunities, treatment, and access to resources. The process of removing systemic barriers that create equality for everyone. Oftentimes, when and I'm sure I can speak for Faye and Ryan both, when we encounter situations where there's fires, there's a little smoke, there's fires brewing in certain departments or what have you, we go right here to equity, right? It's usually an equity issue at the heart of it because people don't feel like they have access, equitable access to everything. I always like to use an example of who gets to use the professional development funds. Who knows about the professional development funds, right? So who knows about it? Who gets access, right? So when you look at the department level, who gets to go to conferences and who doesn't? Right? Who gets supported in various initiatives and who doesn't? That's a way for you to focus on equity, but look at your policies, practices, and procedures to make sure that they're equitable, that everybody has the same opportunity. All right. And I always like to say, who is trying to get in the room but can, who has been historically excluded. These are things that we look at oftentimes when we think about equity. What is inclusion? Creating and sustaining an environment where people from various backgrounds are welcome, valued, treated with respect, regardless to any identity characteristic they maintain, feel included, supported, and integrated into all activities and operations, are given equal access to opportunities, and then given opportunities to contribute their ideas and their concerns, right? So it's one thing to have diversity here, but it's another thing to have equity where everybody feel like, they feel valued, but most importantly, where they feel like they belong. Right? You can be here and not feel like you belong. We encounter that all the time. And one of the things that I often say when people come and ask me about recruitment of individuals from underrepresented populations is if people here currently don't feel like they belong, they're going to let other people know that, right? And that's going to, so any retention and climate issues you have is going to be a recruitment nightmare for you. I don't care if that's with trainees. I don't care if that's with faculty and staff. Right? If people don't feel like they belong, they don't feel valued, they don't feel like they can contribute their ideas, they don't feel secure, seen, heard, respected, supported, you got some issues. And belonging is at the center, right? Most organizations with really solid HR functions utilize a model like this that show that in the heart of everything, belonging, you got DEI around it. So while we're having arguments about diversity, equity, and inclusion, people got to feel like they belong here, right? And we used the tagline for a few years here at the university, you belong. I got a slide at the very end that says you belong, but do you? U of L Health says the power of you, right? It insinuates what? You belong. Is that really true? Are we being doers of our work? Okay. So we have to make sure that we're abiding by that and doing what we can to make sure people have access to all the opportunities and, to fulfill their highest potential while they're here with us. So why does it matter? Diversity fosters innovation, creativity, and problem solving by bringing together individuals with different viewpoints and experiences. In healthcare, diverse teams are better able to address the unique needs of diverse patient populations and improve health outcomes. And in academia, diversity enriches research, teaching, and learning by promoting critical thinking, challenging conventional wisdom. Sometimes we get stuck in the whole mindset that we've always done things a certain way and we're going to continue to do it that way, and it negates all of what we talk about when we envision what diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging means, right? We've always done it this way. Well, it don't mean we have to continue to do it that way, right? If we embrace our diversity, we can get to that point of fostering that innovation that we talk about all the time, to allow people to be creative, let their creative juices flow, be the problem solvers that we know they can be. And we also talk a lot about healthcare disparities. We have a lot of it. There was a recent, piece that came out that talked about the difference between individuals that live in West Louisville and East Louisville has now expanded to 15 years. 15 years. Just a couple of years ago, what we were saying, what, 10 to 12? So we're going in the opposite direction. We're going in the wrong direction, right? And oftentimes as a healthcare system, we have to be aware that in order to make sure that we're improving patient outcomes. But we can't do that if the organization is not well when it comes to our equity, inclusion, and belonging. So part of that also means that we all have to be culturally aware and culturally responsive, right? And I know, my colleagues here that I work collaboratively with, they did a whole piece on cultural humility, right? So there's a piece, so you got a cultural awareness, cultural responsiveness, and cultural humility, terms that many people, don't really hear a lot, right? They hear cultural competence, and it's hard to be competent and know everything about everybody, but you can be aware and you can be responsive, right? And you can be reflective and have your own cultural humility. But ultimately, you need to be aware of your own cultural identity. One place of privilege is that I often find when I'm doing talks and trainings is that there are some people, when you ask them about their culture, they couldn't tell you because they feel like they don't have one. We all have culture. We all have culture, right? But sometimes we're privileged not to think about that, right? Depending on the spaces that we're in. To understand your views, assumptions, and biases about cultural identities different than your own, right? To have the desire and commit to expanding your knowledge about the cultural identities of individuals you work with, the patients you serve, and the community members you engage with, right? It's really important that you get out of the bubble sometimes that we're in and engage and learn more about people who are far different from us. I find I'm energized by that. I know everybody's not like me, but I think that, being here in Louisville, Jefferson County, you can look and see we have a thriving immigrant and refugee population, right? And these are individuals just coming into our healthcare system. We need to know something about them, right? We have the second highest Cuban population outside of Miami. A lot of people don't know that, right? So you can go 30 minutes outside of Jefferson County and really not that far and be in a rural area. So we want to know about individuals that have to drive into us, right? So make yourself culturally aware so that you can be culturally responsive when it comes to engaging with individuals that are different from you. All right, for healthcare providers, healthcare providers must be aware of how cultural backgrounds, beliefs, and practices influence patients' health behaviors, attitudes, and treatment preferences. And it also involves understanding and respecting the cultural norms, values, and traditions of diverse patient populations. Oftentimes, we have a lot of debate about that piece as well. Many physicians will say, well, this is what I'm prescribing. This is what I know what's best. And this is what I need you to do, without respecting some of those norms and traditions and customs and things of that nature. So we have to be aware so we can meet people where they are and get them to where we will hope that they go with their health. Strategies. Commit to ongoing training opportunities to increase your awareness, understanding diverse cultural backgrounds, beliefs, and practices. Build rapport and trust by demonstrating cultural humility and sensitivity. Practice active listening and respectful communication, and then take advantage of opportunities to incorporate collaborative decision-making into the learning and work environment. And that goes back to everybody that's here should have a voice, right? Let them weigh in. Sometimes we have a tendency to leverage age against people. Or you're young, you don't have life experience, so you can't contribute to this conversation, right? I hear that a whole lot from people who think that I'm a lot younger than what I am. And it's, oh, well, you ain't lived long enough yet. But okay, don't devalue my thoughts and opinions because you think my age, right? Because your perceptions of my age. So we have to ensure that everybody that's at the table has an opportunity to provide their ideas and things of that nature. Of course, implicit biases. We all have implicit biases, right? And I know you all hear this a lot, and I'll focus on that bottom piece, but I know you all have received training in this. We all have biases. The goal is to understand our biases so they don't have a negative impact on individuals we interact with, right? And that's where we see a lot of clashes, is when we have people who don't acknowledge their biases and don't stop themselves when they realize that those biases may have a negative impact on those that they interact with. There's different characteristics of implicit bias. Many of them are pervasive. We all possess them. Some of them come out unconsciously, and whether we want to or not, right? And not all biases are bad. Some of our biases keep us safe, right? If you see somebody that you think might be threatening, to you, sometimes you may say, all right, I might need to keep an eye on this person. But at the same time, those biases can get you in trouble too, right? We often see and hear of situations where there are individuals that may be dressed down, right? And because of somebody's perceived bias, may think that we've had this happen, and Faye and Ryan can attest to this, where people say, "Oh, you don't belong in this building." No, I work here, and I've been working here for over a decade, right? We've seen situations where individuals have worked in a particular building for decades, experienced bias by ULPD, right? Students encounter bias in the libraries, right? These are things that have really happened that have caused some large widespread issues that I know myself and some colleagues have had to interact with, what people look like, and how people perceive them. So we have to make sure that our biases don't have a negative impact on those that we work with, those that we educate, and then those that we engage with in the community. I always like to show Bobby Harrell's cycle of socialization, because the reality is many of our biases come from the moment we're born, right? And how we're socialized in our families. I used to say for many years, I see it changing now, that when we're born, they usually give boys blue, swaddle them in blue. They give girls pink. So, most boys, as they grow older, like, I don't want anything pink. That's for girls, right? And my girl, I got all daughters, and sometimes they have a tendency to do that. I don't want blue, daddy, that's for boys, right? I'm like, no, it's not. We can use any color we want to. But the reality is our homes, our communities, our schools, our churches, right? All of the spaces that we find ourselves in have an impact. And there are little mind bugs that we get over our lifespan that start to play a role. All right. And we don't realize it sometimes, because again, some of these things are unconscious. But when you stop and think about, all right, where did I get whatever thought from? Right? Where did it originate? You stop and think about those things, you'll realize sometimes that, all right, that was wrong. So I'm going to do something about changing my mindset about how I view certain individuals. And I always like to point out, when you get around to the cycle of socialization, you can do one or two things. You can promote status quo and just keep doing it, right? Because it doesn't impact you, or you can advocate for change. And I think oftentimes that point where if something doesn't impact you, but you see clearly it impacts other people, don't go with status quo. Step out, be brave, and say, you know what, it don't impact me, but I know that it impacts some of our learners, or it impacts some of my colleagues. So therefore, we need to look at review some things and make some changes. We need more brave individuals to do that. Some of the consequences of it, implicit biases. This is kind of the socially kind of the big A, right? We get around to the isms. Talk about racism, ageism, sexism, classism, sectarianism, heterosexism, ableism, ethnocentrism. There's so many other isms that happen as a result of implicit bias, right? We want to prevent those isms from happening. But we can't address those and keep them from happening if we don't act as if we don't have problems or issues to resolve. Stereotype threat. Claude Steele and Joshua Aronson coined the term, which refers to being at risk of confirming or as a self-characteristic, a negative stereotype about one social group or one social identity, right? I have conversations almost, feels like every morning with my daughter. I'm gonna use my youngest baby again, who's 13, 8th grader, right? Get ready to go to high school next year. And she's just like, Daddy, I'm not good at math. Girls aren't good at math, right? That is an example of stereotype threat, right? Like if you hear it enough that girls can't do math, if you hear that enough, you start to buy into that, right? If there are certain identities that you maintain and you start to hear that something negative about that, you start to buy into it, that's stereotype threat. And oftentimes, it results in decreased performance in the academic and non-academic settings, increased use of self-defeating behaviors, disengagement in more specifically, altered professional aspirations. I have an opportunity to engage with high school students and those that's interested in pre-med and biomedical sciences. It's amazing how many times I have to keep them from having altered professional aspirations of pursuing this route because somebody has told them something negative about an identity or identities that they have, that they can't be a physician, they can't be a neurosurgeon, right? So we have to be mindful of stereotype threat. In addition, we have to be mindful of microaggressions. Dr. Chester Pierce, who was a physician, coined the term microaggressions, which are subtle, verbal, and nonverbal slights, insults, indignities, and denigrating messages directed toward an individual due to their group identity, right? There's 3 different types of microaggressions that happen, but microaggressions are deadly. One of the terms that Dwayne Sue often says that is it like it's a death by a million cuts, right? Oftentimes, the person who's on the receiving end of microaggressions spend a lot of time saying, you know what, I can't believe that happened, right? And if it happens all the time, you're stuck in that space. The person who's committing the microaggression just goes on about their business and life is okay for them. But I can tell you that you may not realize it, but in most cases, the person on the receiving end starts to really develop a sense of like, I don't belong here, right? I can't wait to get out of here. And when I get out of here, I'm going to go as far away as I can and not look back. And again, this is one of those things that I'm going to address the medical students that we have when they're going through their clerkships. Most of the conversations I have with them, and we talk about mistreatment, most of it is microaggression. They're like, you know what, I can't. I don't even want to stay here for residency. I don't want to stay here. So then we have issues with recruiting our own to stay here, right? So there's a lot of things that happen when it comes to microaggressions. And again, sometimes we ask people to be a representative of their entire identity group that they maintain, right? Usually it's race or their cultural background or their religious backgrounds. They can speak for themselves as an individual, but oftentimes they're asked to speak on behalf of the whole identity group, and that's not fair at all for people to have to do. And it happens more often than we think. All right. When you have those stereotypes and those unconscious biases, it leads to prejudging, and then oftentimes it leads to discrimination. So we don't always get people to report discrimination, but it happens more often than we care to admit. And that is large part because when people do step up and report it, nothing ever happens, or at least they feel like nothing ever happens, right? And again, we talk about creating an inclusive learning and workplace. We have to address these things, even when they're not so pretty. So some actions for you all to consider. 1, recognize your implicit biases and remediate your cultural awareness and cultural literacy. Don't expect the only underrepresented or minoritized person in the room to speak on behalf of an entire culture or identity group. Don't assume to know or understand someone based off of preconceptions and stereotypes, and then seek out learning opportunities to educate yourself about cultures other than your own, right? I make it a point to get out and get covered all of Jefferson County when I can. And I talk to people that live in those communities. I pay attention and observe, and I listen to what they're dealing with. It is very easy to tell people what we think they need, right? When we don't understand their physical environment and things that they have access to or maybe not have access to. So get out and grow your knowledge base beyond just a grand round. All right. Be aware of stereotype threat that may be occurring among any underrepresented group. All right. Some of that could be happening with individuals in this room or those that's joining us virtually. Meaningfully integrate diverse cultures and peoples into the work that you all do and other aspects of your life. I think sometimes we come in and say, I'm gonna be diverse at work. But when I leave, take the badge off, I'm gonna go back to my little ball and that's just gonna be it, right? So we have to be very intentional about that. Responsibly address racism and racial tensions when they arise. We're not gonna act like this don't exist, because it does, right? Just because I got a suit on and I got U of L name tag on and the name badge does not, exclude me from being, experiencing racism, because it happens more often than I care to admit, right here in Louisville, sometimes even within our little coveted HSC. So we have to be mindful that these things do happen. Just because it may not happen to you doesn't mean that they're not happening to your colleagues, right? Or your learners that you're working with. Recognize that you and your colleagues share responsibility for acknowledging and addressing inequities experienced by underrepresented groups in the academic and clinical setting, as well as in the community. Some strategies to incorporate: establish inclusive policies, practices, and procedures. that affirm the identities of and experiences of all the individuals that's a part of you all's team, your family, right? As I always like to say, we have a work family. So look at your policies, practices, and procedures. Provide opportunities for mentorship, networking, and professional development that support the advancement of underrepresented groups. Again, I'm gonna talk about things that I know Faye, Ryan, and many others have to deal with in terms when it comes to who gets mentoring, right? Who gets invited to networking events and who gets the professional development. Those are things that we all say, well, yeah, I don't go because I'm not invited to the networking events. They go play golf or they go drink beer on Fridays, right? So there's a lot of different things that occur that we catch wind of that causes people to not feel like they belong. And it starts right there. Who gets the mentoring, right? Who's moving up, right? And getting promoted. And how is that happening? So we want to keep that in mind. Host events and activities that showcase the cultural diversity of the department and celebrate various heritage months and observances. And then I skipped create spaces where individuals can share their experiences, concerns, and aspirations openly without fear of judgment and reprisal. That is important as well. Sometimes we like to stifle those voices and we don't want to hear those because we don't want to acknowledge, look in the mirror and acknowledge the truth about what's going on. Encourage participation in employee resource groups and affinity networks that provide support, networking, and advocacy for underrepresented groups. Implement initiatives to recruit, retain, and promote individuals from underrepresented backgrounds in the field. And then provide mentorship, sponsorship, and leadership opportunities, again, for trainees and early career professionals. And then address those systemic barriers that we know exist within our departments as it relates to policies, practices, and procedures. Here are some resources, and I'll have plenty more. I know Dr. Jones and Mr. Simpson here has resources on their website as well. But the AAMC has a great toolkit that you can use, right? That you all can use as a department or that you can expand your learning individually, right? So utilize those. I have several others here, and I'll provide a list to share out with you all on anti-racism, bias. The Kerwin Institute at Ohio State has great models on implicit bias, but take it upon yourself to learn something, right? And not only do what's easy, the things that's provided to you. We have to all care about this. And here's some books. I know there's some other opportunities, other book readings. Do you all want to plug the current book?
Yeah, there is a book that just came out, faculty member over from Belgium called Microaggressions in Medicine. So Lauren
Freeman.
So it just came out.
And that's all I have. Questions? I'm interested to hear your thoughts and what's happening. Talk to me. I know y'all not this quiet. I know it's early. I know it's early.
I think people don't like being uncomfortable. I think that's why we go into healthcare, is to help people be comfortable. These are uncomfortable conversations. What's your strategy to kind of break through that first level of discomfort with people? I know I have family that are very different from me. They live in very rural Tennessee, where when my cousin played on an AAU basketball team in Chattanooga, that was his first interaction ever with someone of color. And my grandmother, God bless her heart, who meant all the best things in the world by it, said she's just happy that he's getting that exposure because he never had it before. It's an uncomfortable conversation to have with someone from Philadelphia and from a larger city that had those interactions. And it was an uncomfortable family conversation. How do you kind of, in a professional setting, break through that first level of discomfort?
Yeah, so that's always the tough part, right? And I think sometimes if somebody says something or even more so, let's start with say something. If somebody says something that you know is kind of like off a little bit or is toting the line, most times you can just say, ouch, help me unpack what you mean by that, right? Sometimes this is very easy. I'm not with you on this, but help me out here. Talk to me. I'm not understanding what you mean. What did you mean by that, right? And you get people to talk, and sometimes they start talking and realize, oh, okay. So you have to develop your own kind of, over the years. That's what sometimes I'll say, wow, okay, I'm not there with you, but help me out here. Help me understand how did you arrive at that viewpoint? right? Because I want to better understand. And it's okay to say, I might not agree with you, but I want to hear your perspective, right? It's okay to disagree, right? We all have our own viewpoints and perspective. It's okay to disagree, but I want to hear you, right? People want to be heard, all right, and provide kind of their, context around why they think the way they think. And when people do things, it depends on the severity of what they do, action-wise, because some things warrant intervention right there. To say, hey, let me intervene here. Let me step in. And again, not everybody is brave enough to do that, right? Sometimes it may not necessarily be in that moment, but you may say, hey, you did something. Let me kind of talk to you a few minutes. You did something to a colleague of ours or to a learner that I think could be, problematic, right? And have a conversation to the side. But there are some times where intervention is needed right then. And we get a lot of, situations where people won't, they know that what was said was wrong. Now, let me address the elephant in the room too, the power dynamic, right? A person's positionality within the organization, their title, their experience and things like that. Sometimes those are the ones that commit some of these things, and people who don't feel like they have that same power, or they say, well, they're my evaluator, right? Or I need them for X, Y, and Z, so I'm not going to say anything. There are ways, there are reporting mechanisms that come to me, right? That's what I'm here for, the Chief Diversity Officer. Go to the Dean. There's people here. Go to Dr. Jones, go to Mr. Simpson. Like, there are people here who can help navigate those kind of things. And I think that we need to provide more training on those toolkits. Like, how do you add more skills, like the skills training to be able to intervene when it happens. But usually I try to ouch method, or like, hey, I'm not quite with you on this. Help me out here. Help me understand what you mean. Because that could be, considered racist or discriminatory or a whole host of other things.
Can I add something?
Yeah, go ahead.
One thing too, I've had caregivers, I'm a pediatrician, so I've had some caregivers to say some what I perceive very insulting things to me before, but you can't just not stop, can't not see their child. So what I've done, and sometimes it's challenging, is figure out what you have in common. Find something that you have in common, and in a lot of cases is that you want the best, and know they want the best for their child. And you start there, and hopefully start with that conversation in that way. Find what things that you can go with.
Yeah, I wanted to ask for the clarification in a part of like microaggression. There was one picture stating that there was a question like where are you really from? So just as an IMG, whenever I'm seeing the patient, the conversation eventually will get to like the question like where's your accent from? And to be honest, like for me, it's kind of entertaining. We can discuss things. So, and I found that now I'm also doing it to other people. And I was just wondering if that's if it's form of the microaggression. And if yes, then like what are the data supporting that it's really like hurting somebody? Because for example, for me, it's kind of entertaining. And I was wondering if I'm like unconsciously doing something bad.
Yeah. So let me provide a little more context to that particular piece, right? There are oftentimes when we talk about ourselves and we say, yeah, well, I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, right? And if people perceive me, or if they hear accent, or they perceive me a certain way, say, no, where are you really from? Like, no, I just told you, I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, right? I'm American. So why would you then come back and say, no, like, really, you're not from here? No, that's where I'm from. So if someone is to ask you, hey, I hear accent, where are you from? And you tell them, and their response back to you is, no, like, really, where are you from? Like, that's a microaggression, because I just told you, that I told you where I was from, right? So a lot of it is based off the information that you have, and sometimes people do that, right? And that's why I use that specifically down here at HSC. People encounter that a lot, particularly people from different racial, ethnic backgrounds get that quite a bit, because people make assumptions, right? And then when they say, no, this is where I'm from, and somebody comes back and say, no. Instead of saying, hey, where your family from, right? It's ways to have those conversations, but most commonly when people experience it a lot, it gets frustrating, right? And so that's where the buildup happens. And sometimes we're guilty within our kind of organizational structure, but then people experience it when they leave here too, right? So you think about not only microaggressions, those kind of things that happen here within the work and learning environment, but when I leave here, I'm also experiencing it, and eventually people explode like, listen, I wish somebody would, don't ask me that damn again, don't ask me that, right? So we have to be mindful of that. I put the, you don't speak Spanish, again, there's a lot of different examples out there when you go and you start looking up different forms of microaggressions, but if someone who identifies as Hispanic Latinx, right, they may present that way, right, and might even say that I'm, Hispanic or I'm Latinx. Say, well, but you don't speak Spanish? Like, no, not everybody that's of that background speaks Spanish. So again, if you're in recruiting or you're hiring, you either they're going to acknowledge that, hey, I'm fluent in Spanish, right, or what have you. But that, to make that assumption, like, what? You're Hispanic, but you don't speak Spanish? Again, a lot of it's context too. And then the one in the middle is oftentimes we have somebody from a minoritized background. We often put it on them to explain to the larger group something about their background. I can speak as a Black male who identifies as African American from West Louisville, right? But I can't speak as a Black male who might live in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, or Central Tennessee, or what have you. There may be some overlapping experiences, but the reality is I can't speak. I can speak for me, right? And not try to speak for all Black men. I hope that answers.
We do have a couple questions in the chat, I think.
Okay.
Quick one.
I need help with the practical way to speak out against a former friend in a leadership role. She is in our state legislature and made some despicable comments that were also blatant lies. I don't care to alienate her publicly, but I'm concerned about mutual friends' tips. So that kind of goes to what you were saying about family, right? Sometimes if that's a friend, that's somebody that we should be able to have some civil discourse with. We should be able to have a conversation. And again, it's to unpack what that person is saying, right? Help me understand what you're saying and how did you arrive to that, kind of conclusion. And again, it's one of those things where sometimes we have to evaluate who our friends are, right? If this is a person that is known for, being persistent in these kind of actions and kind of commentary and the things they say, maybe that's somebody that I know for me, I would distance myself from, because that's not the type of energy that I want around me. That's just me, right? But I think sometimes we have to evaluate friendships and family ships, because sometimes our families can be the worst perpetrators of that, especially around holidays when we're around the table, little libations get involved and people start to have, say things and you're like, wow, okay. Again, I can speak for myself. I distance myself from family and so-called friends that do that. That's me. I don't want that kind of toxic energy around me. So I protect my space. That's one of the ways to do it. But if it is a true friend, have that conversation, say, hey, and again, it's always tough because you don't want to do it in a threatening manner. But you want to say, hey, you've said some things that it's bothered me. I thought through it. We'd love to have a conversation with you and see what they say. Maybe they agree to have a conversation, maybe not. But also understand that having a conversation and kind of sharing your experience and your knowledge base on this doesn't mean that they're going to change. Also, which could also be kind of a frustrating part too. Some people just won't change. It just is what it is. And we have to understand that. But then I think from an organizational standpoint, we have to make sure that individuals that feel like, I don't have to change, I won't change, I don't care about these things. We have to really pay attention to creating an environment where everybody feels like they belong. And sometimes, you have to call in help, say, this is not what we're trying to do here. We want to be better than that. We want to be the preference of, trainees, that just look prospective trainees, prospective faculty, staff, etc. Thank you. So can you help me extrapolate what you just taught to help our children deal with racism, microaggressions? And yes, and we have some colleagues here in the city. what I'll do is, I would love to help anybody who feel like they need some additional support and want to chat. We have people here who specifically work with youth on these type of things. And I'm happy to connect you with them because there could be some nuances of like phase of pediatrician, right? There's just some things that she know about working with kids over her experience that I might not keep in mind. Because some of these things you hope that somebody with an adult brain is fully developed can absorb this content, but you have to approach it a little differently with kids. I know I spend a lot of time talking to my daughters about this. I have a 23-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 13-year-old. And they all have different viewpoints on these things, but I'm like having a conversation with them, right, actively, and I'm listening to them because I got to understand what their influences are too, and it's social media, things at school, and all that good stuff. So yes, I'm happy to help. Let's connect after. And my email is dwayne.compton@louisville.edu. I'll send this PowerPoint slide over for you all to have as well with my contact information. Other thoughts or questions? Well, I'm here to help, and I do want to make one last plug before I turn it back over to the team here, Lauren. Is that outside of DEI, I'm responsible for community engagement, right? The Office of Community Engagement and Diversity, along with the Health Science Campus Office of Diversity and Inclusion. We have several initiatives that provide opportunities to engage with young folks, right? Whether that be middle and high school students, as well as undergraduate students. And as I was saying earlier, you can't be what you don't see, right? People need to see you all. They need to understand how you navigated your pathway to where you are right now, right? And some of the things that you navigated with ease or that you were challenged with, right? So we do have opportunities to engage with students and would love to, you're willing to engage with our student groups we work with. Would love to have you talk with them just to share your journey and why you chose this career path. So I'm here, utilize me for that as well. Otherwise, thank you all for inviting me.
Thank you.
I will make sure that we share this slide and Dr. Compton's contact information with everyone. And if you're joining us virtually, I will put the CAD code in the chat before we log off. So thank you all so much for joining us. And there's a lot of Panera, so if you have any breakfast, please help yourself.
What you just mentioned, I heard it.
How are you? Good. How are you? I'm well. I haven't been able to get to see any practice. And know it's updated and it's expired or something. Let me share the one I do use the website. I'll text it to you. And see if they can.
Yes.
The 941 number. Does that go to that phone? Or another one? The other one. Is that the 502 number? I can use it.
I didn't check my schedule until after I came back, and that's when I like.
Taking up so much space, Courtney. Are those is that the plates for these? You should put them there.
Yeah, plug that in. Maybe we get some new.
I can't believe we even have that. Do we need new pucks?
Can you give me?
I can make things happen
Sometimes we do.
for sure.
Sometimes we do.
Just don't make me one of the basement people, please.
And then I just felt really bad because like, last year, like, talked about flooding, like switch my people's night floats. And like, then I was like, talking about my 24.
I know, I was thinking that.
I was just gonna do
That too, but it's just like.
And then I tried to get it.
Hey, you get that off the
It's actually allowed.
You drink from.
You're gonna break it. I was like,
That's fine. I was gonna put the pictures up, well, that's Saturday. But now, there's family coming. I already got one of the muffins now.
Oh, you do? Which one? You get one on one. Which one do you like?
Well, I take both of them.
You don't get like a complication.
That's the.